Hello, I'm Nedoux from the Nedoux Sewing Club. Welcome to Stitched. Iro and Buba is a classic design. It's been around forever and it flatters most body types. Today I'll show you how to make one. In recent times, the Iro and Buba has been given a modern facelift with the transition from traditional fabrics like heavy laces to drapey fabrics like silks, chiffons, and satins in vibrant prints. And in terms of the architecture, the Buba is a boxy blouse that is literally 3 folded rectangles stitched together. It's that basic. And the Iro is technically a wrap skirt, if you think about it that way. Both are super simple to make. Let's get started. 4 yards of fabric and bias tape in the matching color. So before you cut your fabric, it's important to take accurate measurements. So first measurement is the length of your buba. So take your tape rule and then starting from the nape of your neck, which is your neck point, just right here, pass the tape rule down over the fullest part of your bust, all the way down to your hip line. For me, it's about 26 inches, somewhere about that. And so that number, let's call that number length. And so that number, add a hemming allowance of about 1.5 inches because after sewing, you have to finish the edge of your blouse. So that's total length, which is your length plus hemming allowance. Good. Secondly, take your hip measurement. But if your bust is wider than your hip, then take down that measurement. Good. Let's call that measurement H or B. And thirdly, to that number, H or B, add a wearing ease of 4 to 6 inches. So this is how it works. After adding that number to your hip or bust, the final number gives you your buba circumference, which is the final width of the blouse. So in my case, my hip is 36 inches. I'm adding 4 inches to mine. You could go as far as 6 inches if you wanted to, which comes to about 40 inches. So that will give me my buba circumference. As you can see, it's quite blousy already. Okay? So we call that number the buba circumference. Good. So before I go further, I'd like to tell you a few things about fabric. In terms of yardage, a yard simply means 36. That's what it means. But in terms of fabric yardage, a yard means, let me show you. It means 44 to 60 inches wide and 36 inches long. So if I measure with my tape rule, the first 36 inches is a yard, and the next is another yard, and so on and so forth. And then also, if you notice with most wax print fabric like this one, that is Ankara, at the lengthwise portion, there's a thin border on both ends. In most cases, you'd find the brand name of the company who made the fabric, and it's called the selvage. The selvage. So that edge is tightly woven. Okay? Good. So get a piece of fabric and fold it lengthwise. Lengthwise. Okay? And also fold widthwise. Like this. Good job. Just smooth things down. Good. Let all the edges touch properly. And you could also pin if you like. I like doing that a lot so the things are nicely, perfectly placed properly. So here's what you do next. Starting from the folded edge, measure your total length, which is your length of buba plus hemming allowance. In my own case, 27.5, 26 plus 1.5, remember? And mark that down. Okay, well, in my own case, I think I measured this already. I'll just do this for the benefit of all of you watching. Mine is precisely 27 because I measured this already. Okay, so good. So next step, to your buba circumference measurement, divide that by 4. Okay? and then add to that number a sewing allowance of 1 inch. Because after sewing at the sides, you have to have sewing allowance for the finishing. Okay? So let's call that quarter buba circumference plus sewing allowance. So in my own case, that's 40 inches divided by 4, which is 10, plus 1 inch, 11. Okay, that's 11. So what I'll do is this. I will connect the dots that I've placed. Okay, I'm just marking things up so I can see. So now I'll connect the dots like so. So I measured quarter buba circumference plus sewing allowance, remember, plus hemming allowance. Good job. I'll just pin this down just before the line so that nothing moves when I'm cutting, because fabric tends to move when you cut it for some reason. Okay, and then I'll cut this along the line I drew very carefully. Good. So now I'm left with the rectangle that is my total length plus hemming, which is length plus hemming allowance, and as wide as my quarter buba circumference plus sewing allowance. Good job. So the next step is to cut out the neckline of your buba. So most bubas come with a round neckline. Super easy to do. I'll show you how to do this. So at the edge that has a double fold, so there are two ends. One is like you can open that on. Another one has a double fold. Draw a rectangle that is 5 inches wide. Just mark it out. 5 inches wide and 4 inches long. So 4 by 5 rectangle. Just mark it out carefully. Good. And just draw it out. Like so. Good job. So at the folded portion, the one that has a double fold, a rectangle that is 5 inches wide and 4 inches deep. Good. Now, you need a curved ruler to draw the neckline curve. This is really precise compared to using your hand. Okay? Now within that rectangle, draw a curve okay, a smooth curve within that rectangle, and then just cut along the curved line like so. You can see it's out. So here's what happens. So that's a quarter width of my buba. When I open this up, a round neck is taking shape already. And I'll show you something really brilliant. When I open it up again, there. So that's the hole, the neckline hole. When I fold it, you can see it's taking shape already. So the good thing about the lengthwise fold is that it removes the need for a shoulder seam, which is brilliant if you ask me. It saves a lot of time, okay? Okay, so the next thing to do is to cut out the buba armhole. First thing to do, turn your fabric with the wrong side facing outwards, like so. Be careful that you don't mess up the fold, the shoulder fold. So align it very carefully at the neckline and then pin carefully at the shoulder fold. 2 pins will be fine, just to hold things down. At the neckline, align the front and back neatly. 2 pins will do. Just so things don't move around when you're taking measurements. And another 2 at the shoulder. Good. So in terms of the armhole measurement, there's a generic sizing for this. So for a small to medium size, I'll say somewhere between a 16 to 18 inch round armhole. And for a larger size, I would say from about 18 to 20. But you can always check. Like in my own case, I use 18 inches for my Buba armhole. So I'll just check. I've measured 18 inches of the tape rule, hold it down to make like a little circle, and pass my arm through. It's looking good already. I like that. So to that number, divide that number by 2. For me, that's 9. And then come to the end, the edge here, and measure the armhole circumference divided by 2. For me, that's 9. So I'll just mark it out here, 9. And on the other side, I'll mark out 9 as well. Mark it out very clearly. Okay. Good. So what we'll do now is we'll just sew down the sides and then attach the sleeves. So you'd recall that I made provisions for seam allowance at the sides before cutting, and I left 1 inch on both sides. So now I'm just about to stitch, and here's what I'm going to do. I will be sewing inwards by 1 inch, just beneath the armhole mark, and then all the way down, with the 1 inch allowance taken into account. Same thing on the other side. So I'll place the edge of my fabric at the 1 inch sewing allowance point on my sewing machine. Starting from the armhole point which I marked earlier. So towards the end, at about say 1 inch before the end, I usually reduce the length of my stitch width, the length of it, so the smallest size. So what that does is that it locks in the stitch. You could also use the lock stitch at the end if you want to, but that's my method. So do whatever works for you. And then cut. So we've done one side. Do the same thing for the other side. So I'll just remove the pins. So at this point, I have a Buba that's like a sleeveless Buba at this point. So it needs sleeves. Just take out all of the pins. Good job. Okay, so the next thing to do is to cut out our sleeves right. Here's what you do. To determine the length of your sleeve, fold the Buba again till it's a quarter width, like so, and hold the edge just somewhere at the center of your chest, just to get a sense of where the end stops. So it stops somewhere here for me. So just take note at that point. And with your tape rule, decide how much longer from that point you want your sleeve to be. Okay? Another way of doing this is this. Remember your quarter Buba circumference measurement? Bear that in mind and hold the tape rule somewhere at your clavicle. So you get that point. And then from that point, decide how much longer you want your sleeve to be. So in my case, I'm going to extend my sleeve by, I'm thinking, somewhere like a midi length for me. It could be a short length, a midi, or a full, like a long length if you want. Depends on your preference. So I'll add 12 inches more. So that's the length of the sleeve. And in terms of the width of the sleeve, it should be the same width as my armhole naturally. So here's what I would do. So get a piece of fabric like this and fold it. Fold it. Good. Then along the length, hold on. Along the length, measure your desired sleeve extension, which for me was 12. And to that number, add a sewing allowance of 1 inch at the beginning and hemming allowance of 1.5 at the end. So that's a total of 14.5. 1, 12, and 1.5. And then for the width of the sleeve, it should be the same as my armhole circumference. So I would also use the same measurements as 9 I used before, which is 18 divided by 2, which is 9, plus a sewing allowance of 1 inch because it will be folded and stitched before being attached to the Buba blouse. Super simple. So basically, a folded rectangle that is my desired sleeve length extension plus sewing allowance plus hemming allowance, and as wide as my armhole or half of my armhole plus 1 inch sewing allowance. Another rectangle. I said so from the beginning, remember? 3 folded rectangles sewn together. So for me, that's 10, which is 9 plus 1. And so before I cut, I like to pin things down. I find that so much safe. It's so safe. So I have 10, another 10. Just measure it out carefully. And then 14.5. Good. And then I connect. And then I cut out the excess bit that I don't need at all. There. And here. As you can see. So a folded rectangle that is as wide as half of my armhole plus 1 inch sewing allowance, and as long as my sleeve length extension, plus sewing allowance of 1 inch at the top and 1.5 inches as my hemming allowance. And so do the same for the other sleeve. This is for one sleeve, see? And for another sleeve, really easy. So now we have the Buba body, the left sleeve, and the right sleeve. What's left to do is to join the sleeves together and then attach to the Buba blouse. Very simple. Okay, so you'd recall that I took into account a sewing allowance of 1 inch on the Buba sleeves. So what I'll do is I'll fold it so that the wrong side is facing outwards, like so. Fold back to my rectangle again, and then pin at the ends. Just a few pins. So I'll be sewing 1 inch inwards from the edge. So I place the edge against the 1 inch seam allowance point of my sewing machine and just sew it again. Okay, so about ½ inch or 1 inch towards the end, you could either use the back stitch or lock stitch button, or you could reduce the length of the stitch, which I usually do, and then finish off. So that's one sleeve done. So just do the same thing to the other sleeve. So now at this point, we have to marry the sleeves to the body. Okay, so here's what you do. So we'll turn each sleeve with the right side facing out. Okay, right side facing out. Okay, and then with the blouse still with the wrong side facing out. So sleeves, right side facing out, buba body, wrong side facing out. And you can tell the side that's wrong or right? Yeah. Okay, so let's start with one sleeve. So insert the sleeve. Through the armhole. Until the stitched portion aligns with the stitched portion of the blouse. You know, like putting a circle into another circle basically. And it should fit because the sleeve width is the same as the armhole width and it fits perfectly. Okay, just align them carefully and then pin. But just make sure that your edges are properly aligned. That's really important. It's important to sew neatly and precision. Okay? So the sleeve is inside, edges aligned, and I'll be sewing round 1 inch from the edge. So here's what you do. If you're using a machine like this one, an electric desktop machine, it has something called a free arm, which comes in handy for sewing narrow circular spaces like a sleeve hole or a neckline. So I'll just take this out. So that narrows up the area nicely for me. So I'll insert, it's like a hole. I'll insert this into the hole, into the arm, the free arm. And aligning the edge at 1 inch, at the 1 inch seam allowance point, I'll sew. And back. And then lock stitch. Good job. Okay. Snip everything, all the loose threads, very important. And then take out your pins and I'll show you something. Be very careful when handling pins. Okay, so now I would reach into the hole and bring out the sleeve. It's taking shape already. You can see a buba body with one sleeve attached. Let's do the other sleeve the same way. And then pin around. Just like before, I insert the hole into the free arm. So over it and lock stitch. And we're done. Then I'll remove the other sleeve. It's looking good already, as you can see. So that's the buba body and 2 sleeves attached. So I'll just turn this to the right side facing out so we can see what we've done. So there we are. So a round neck, buba, and 2 sleeves attached. So the next thing to do is the finishing. We'll finish the neckline with some bias tape and then hem the sleeve bottom edge by folding inwards and also hem the buba bottom edge by folding inwards. Okay, so at this point we will finish the neckline of the buba and we'll be doing this with some bias tape. I think bias tape is my favorite finishing notion. It's flexible, it's versatile, it's affordable, and it comes in beautiful colors like this one. The thing about bias tape is that it guides your sewing. Like this is a 1-inch wide bias tape. It's folded, it comes pre-folded. And if I open it up, there's a demarcation. The first one is a 1/4 of an inch, and then 1/2 inch, and then another 1/4 of an inch. So it's very good in the sense that it helps you know where to put your stitches when sewing. So I'll take this, starting from one shoulder, and starting about 1 inch down. I'll align the edge of the bias tape with the edge of my neckline, okay? And just pin at the very bottom so that when I sew, the pins will not interfere with the machine needle. So just pin all the way around the neckline. Bias is very flexible, so it's perfect for finishing curved edges like necklines and armholes, and even dresses that have curved hemlines. Okay, so when you go all the way around, you need to have two, I would say, 2 ends, like extra bit of bias tape of about 1 inch sticking up at the end, and then just snip. Okay, good. Let me just pin this down properly. Okay, so I've gone all the way around, and then I have about 1 inch on both ends sticking up, like the excess. Very important. And then what I'll do is I'll align the edge, just underneath the sewing machine foot, making sure that my needle hits the crease line, the 1/4 inch crease line on the bias tape, which is effectively a sewing allowance of a 1/4 of an inch, which is brilliant. And then I'm making use of the free arm again. Like I said, it's good for sewing circular areas like a neck hole or a armhole. Good. So I'll place it at the edge, ensuring that my needle keeps on hitting that crease line on the bias tape. It's really important, okay? So it just involves control at this point. You are in charge of the sewing machine. You control what it does, okay? Okay, just steady, just take your time. Done one side. Okay, now for the other side. And I'm done. I have the bias tape sewn first attached to the right side of the Buba blouse against the neckline edge, and then I've sewn round and I'm left with 2 excess bits about 1 inch long. So here's what I'll do. I'll flatten both strips at the point where they meet and then attach them. I'll just stitch down. And then I reduce it to about, say, 1/2 inch. Good. I'll just cut up all the excess thread. So the next thing to do is, now I will turn the bias tape inward so that inside of the blouse and not on the outside. So now I'll turn my buba. As you can see, we're halfway done. Turn the buba with the wrong side facing out. Good. And then I would fold the bias tape inwards fully so that it's no longer showing on the outside of the blouse. Fold it down carefully against the second crease line. It's a smooth fold. So all that's left is really just about a ½ inch of bias tape when I do the second fold. And then I pin again. Just pin round. It's a temporary pinning because as we're sewing, it will take the pins out, so it doesn't bother us. And we're done pinning all the way around. So as you can see, if I showed you the inside, you can't see the bias tape anymore. It's on the inside, nice and tidy. You can only see about ½ inch of the bias tape after pinning. And so we'll sew all the way around as close to the edge of the bias tape as possibly. Very carefully. So take the pins out as you go along, very carefully. And lock stitch at the very end. Cut off all the excess threads. And it's looking good already. So I'll turn it, so this is the view from the inside. You can see a nice yellow border all around. And on the right side, I'll just turn this out. So as you can see, on the right side, you can no longer see the bias tape. It's nice and smooth and tidily closed up. So the last thing to do to the buba is to hem the sleeve bottom edges and the buba bottom edge. Okay. So the next thing to do is to finish the hem of both the sleeve and the buba. So there are two ways of doing this. First of all, let me turn this with the wrong side facing out, and I'll tell you the two ways of doing this. There's always more than one way of doing things anyway. Okay, so if you own an overlocking or a serging machine, simply weave the bottom edge first and then fold downwards by the hemming allowance, which in this case is 1.5 inches, and then stitch around. So the same thing for the other sleeve and the bottom. If you don't own an overlocking machine, simply use the zigzag stitch setting on your electric sewing machine. I explain how to do this in my seam finishing video. And then fold downwards as well and also sew round. If you don't want to use that method, you could use a more traditional method, which is you fold downwards at the hemming allowance of 1.5 in this case, and then tucking the edge by about a ½ inch, effectively leaving 1 inch exposed, and then sew at the edge around. Either method is fine. So I'll take this out, which leaves the free arm available to use because it's a circular space. Very convenient. So the zigzag, the mid-width zigzag stitch. Super fast. So the edges are nicely locked in and will not unravel. So I'll do the same thing for the other sleeve and for the buba bottom. Okay, so I've woven the other sleeve and the bottom. The next thing to do is I'll fold downwards by my hemming allowance of 1.5 inches, and then I'll sew about 1/8 of an inch or 2/8 of an inch from the edge, the folded edge. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll be sewing somewhere between 1/4 inch from the edge, the woven edge. Okay, still using my free arm. It's a narrow circular space. Put this inside and find a point just somewhere about 1/4 inch from the edge, and then sew around. So change my stitch back to a regular stitch. Okay. So I'll go over the beginning and lock stitch. Done. So I'll do the same thing for the other sleeve and the buba hem. And I'm done. I hem the bottom edge of both sleeves and the bottom, attach bias to the neckline. Super easy. That's the buba blouse. It looks good, don't you think? So all that's left to do is to cut the Iro. Like I said before, the Iro is technically like a wrap skirt if you think about it that way. And it's typically as wide as 2 yards and 12 inches. So the length depends on your preference. It could be knee length, midi length, or maxi. I like the maxi length. I think it's a very grown-up silhouette. It's very elegant too. So all you do is just take your fabric and measure 2 yards and 12 inches, which is about 84 inches. And then make sure you finish the 2 extreme ends with a double fold. So fold inwards by about 1/2 inch once and do that again, and then stitch all the way down on both ends, and you're done. Really, really easy. Always remember the golden tips of sewing. First of all, press open your seams after stitching. I showed how to do this in my first video, the behind the seams video. Secondly, leave enough seam allowance before cutting your fabric. And thirdly, not the least, but most importantly, seam finishing. Finish your seams properly after stitching. I shared some seam finishing techniques in my seam finishing video. So for more sewing tips and inspiration, do visit my website, Nedoux.com. And to enroll for the next NSC sewing workshop, click the Sewing Club link. I'll see you next time. Bye.